to check sort of the readiness of the SAIs to deal with this COVID. So we would like to hear your views. Edmond has done the analysis. Edmond is joining us. He's going to be asking the questions. He's done the analysis from various SAIs and donors, and maybe he can brief you on what he found. And then there's some questions that we would like to hear from your perspective, and also just your views with regard to the COVID-19 audit and the message that you would like to send to the region for your colleagues in the region that they should pay attention to, and from your experiences as well. So Edmond, I don't know if you want to give AG a bit of background on the analysis that you did.
Thank you so much, Macy, and thank you so much, AG, for finding time in your busy schedule to indulge us like this. From a more professional perspective, I'll just let you know that I've already started the recording. We did mention and we did discuss that your communications team will have a chance to look at this recording before we do any further work with it going forward. But the idea is that we do want to share the pearls of wisdom that you have, being someone who has been going through the COVID question as a SAI leader, and we believe that this is the right time for us to be hearing more and more of the voices of our leaders as we're going through a tough time. So, sir, indeed, we did do a research, a sub-Saharan research, whereby we asked quite a number of SAIs in the sub-Saharan region. Almost 30 SAIs did respond to this research, and we got various pinpointing messages from them. Some of the key things that we have found out, Auditor General, is that in relation to resilience, during the times of COVID, it seems our SAIs did struggle. But however, there is a clear sign that they haven't given up. But now what we wanted to do was just to chart the way forward, to say, okay, COVID came unexpected, even though we do believe that there's quite a lot happening in Africa as far as disaster is concerned. But the question of COVID was a little bit unique and very different from the ones that we faced before. And as such, we do want to consolidate the findings of our analysis by just pinpointing a few questions with you so that we can synthesize our overall findings and move on to try and help our SAIs to be more resilient and prepare themselves for the future. No one necessarily knows when the COVID is going to end, but of course that is not the reason for us to sit down on our laurels and just watch. And your SAI, Auditor General, is one SAI that has already proven that it's been working. And we've noticed that you did share a document entitled AGSA Journey on Government Response to COVID-19 Pandemic. So this is the first question that we really want to hear from you. Do you have any key takeaways from a document, which we as AFROSAI-E have also published? But of course, it being a passive document, it doesn't just speak to itself. We need you to speak to it just a bit so that the audience can understand your coming on it.
No, thank you very much, Edmond, and thank you for those introductory remarks and the insights from the other SAIs in the continent. Interestingly, just before I get to the point you are raising, exactly this time last week, Monday, we had a virtual meeting with civil society organizations. Mm-hmm. And they were quite keen to know what else is happening in the continent with regards to the rest of the SAIs response and how they are adapting to the new conditions in the rest of the continent. So I think it will be quite worthy to reach out to those civil society organizations, because as if I knew, I said that perhaps they may be well placed to link up with AFROSAI-E, who's based in Pretoria, so that they can catch up with what else happens in the rest of the continent. And this was soon after our CBC meeting of the AFROSAI-E AGs had taken place, but none of this matter arose there. But I did know that you guys would pick it up with the rest of the continent. So There's some homework for you to do there to put the minds of those CSO organizations, some of them that operate globally, as well as others that operate in South Africa and broader in the continent. So there's a keen interest in the civil society grouping about the response of the SAIs, not only ours, but also broader in the area that we are operating in as the English-speaking SAIs. Now, coming back to the specific question on the document, you know, when the lockdown was announced, and I think this is one of the key things that helps us as part of a global network of Auditors General. And we were all directed, as the President did in March, to remain at home. And what preoccupied my mind, among others, what was going to happen to the people who were now going home, because many of them were not going to have the opportunity to interact normally in preparation for the commencement of the annual statutory audit, because it's difficult to do auditing remotely, you know. But then I remembered that at one stage when we went to what we call the Global Audit Leadership Forum, it's called GALF, the Global Audit Leadership Forum, which is a group of SAIs and different Auditors General that come together once a year to reflect on topical matters. One of the topical issues when we hosted this meeting, I think it was in 2013 in Japan, the main topic of that Gulf meeting was about auditors' readiness to respond in situations of disaster. The Japanese SAI demonstrated to us by illustrating different pictures that they took when the nuclear disaster hit them during that period. And they showed how they responded as a SAI in handling matters of that kind. But before that also, I think it was in Mexico in 2007, where there was a working group that looked at the possibility to develop auditing standards around issues of operating in disaster environments where there's disaster funding, which is emergencies and all of that. And then in addition to that, as you know, closer to home, of course, we had the Ebola disaster in 2015 with the involvement, among others, of the SAI of Sierra Leone, and also the tsunamis where the Indonesian SAI and all of that. So as I was reflecting on what is going to happen, this almost came to mind, you know, and I think it speaks to how all of us as SAIs need to be alert to what is happening around us in our community of supreme audit institutions, so that when things happen in closer to home, we can trigger the necessary lessons without having to start the job afresh. So within a week of that, I then asked the guys to send the ESAI 5500 series to all the teams, all the auditors in the office, so that they can, while they are sitting at home figuring out what to do, they can familiarize themselves with what an auditor can do in a situation of disaster. Remember, it was in the first week and we didn't quite know how this all is going to turn out.
Oh, yes.
But I think it was good to make sure that people at an intellectual level can at least appreciate that there's something that they can do in the context of having to operate in a disaster. Because when you operate in a disaster, the country and the government will invoke emergency provisions. Everything that gets bought is going to have to be bought in an emergency. When funds have to be distributed, they must be distributed in an emergency, and so on and so on. So I think many people became alert to the challenges and the risks that will confront them as they operate within an emergency environment. So this was a useful thing to then draw from the lessons and the work that was developed by INTOSAI, because most of that now is already coded into the SAIs, effectively, the SAIs 5500 series, which speak to the key things that auditors must look at when they are responding to situations of disaster. So that was the starting point, to begin to empower the people without having to do elaborate research, but to draw from the repository of knowledge that is already available. So that was our first step. And we didn't tell people to come back and write an exam about what they read, but we said just be aware that at some point you're going to be called upon to stand up and render certain services, and this is the tools that, among others, are at your disposal. So that was the first response, basically, before we even got to the next phases of the process. So while that was happening, we also felt that let us write something that we can share in the public domain, so that we can reflect our views about where we think as a Supreme Audit institution we could contribute. At that time, if you remember, it was even before the announcement of the package, support package of 500 billion that was announced by the president. And we were already developing this thinking in terms of what are the areas that we can get involved with. We published it and we shared it with the president as well, to give him a sense of what it is that can be done, because his view was that this money that we are going to set out, many people are concerned that it might be stolen and it might go missing. So came across and said, AG, please help us to prevent this money from being squandered and from being stolen. So that was a very powerful message, I think, looking at us, and said, you are the guys that we can rely on as the first troops that will be able to see and to alert us in situations where other people are interested in taking this for themselves. So this became a rallying cry for us, because then when we pulled together the executive teams, we already had an idea that we've got some level of support for the kind of work that we might want to get involved with. So those were the initial steps that we took, and that's what transpired in those interactions.
Excellent. Wow, thank you so much, AG. I mean, this message goes to everybody who's going to be viewing this video, just to let them know that the document that the Auditor General is talking about is entitled AGSA Journey on Government Response to COVID-19 Pandemic. We have it on the AFROSAI-E website. I personally have gone through it and I found it very insightful. It's a very strategic document, but what made it very nice to any auditor is that it really actually drills down to some very technical aspects, such as risk analysis and so forth. So I do encourage people to go on the AFROSAI-E website and look at it. Auditor General Makwetu, you are a leader in the INTOSAI region, and as such, you are seen putting on quite a number of hats. For starters, you're leading CBC, the INTOSAI CBC. At the same time, you are the AFROSAI-E host SAI. And lastly, but not least, you are the Auditor General of South Africa, a very proud nation, which, just like any other country, has been going through a tough time. But as you've already mentioned, Auditor General, there was a lockdown, and SAIs, like most other services, were not designated as essential services to continue working during the pandemic. Now, my question to you, sir, in your view, was this a technical usurping of the independence of the SAI, or was it just a mere oversight?
You know, when you are instructed to go to lockdown, you almost presuppose that there's a health issue that is driving that decision. And when you don't respond to that health issue, you might expose many people to danger, and they might die. So we didn't even think about the usurping of independence. We were just thinking about protecting each other and protecting our lives, because the ultimate in terms of all this is that people were just gonna die, because we were already seeing some numbers coming out of Italy, Spain at that time, and so on. So we didn't want to interfere with the decision that was taken, and we felt that if we are on lockdown, even the officials of government are on lockdown, which means that they are sitting at home. They are not required to come to the office. So it's clear that for any auditor then to be effective, there's going to be a level of interaction between the auditor and the auditee. So we were calm about it. And that's why we said we are going to continue to do the best we can in the background in preparation for the upcoming cycle of the statutory audit without requiring a direct physical interface with our auditees. So it didn't bother us because we knew that it was not a case of an instruction only to us, but it was an instruction to the entire ecosystem that operates within an audit environment. So we were quite easy about that decision. Of course, it was a restriction, and the restriction has got its own negatives as well, but we were able to cope with it regardless.
Auditor General, you've just raised a very exciting issue here, the issue of human life, preserving human life. Now, when we are looking at the stakeholders that are looking at you as a SAI, for some reason, people believe that the SAI is sort of like exempt to some of these disasters, and the audit expectation really does not change even during a time of disaster. Now, Auditor General, please enlighten us. How did you balance, or how are you balancing preserving the human life of your auditors and at the same time keeping to the mandate as people still expect you? People shouldn't steal, people shouldn't pilferage, compliance, performance, all should continue under your watch.
No, exactly. I think it's a very important point, that one, because, you know, when there's an opportunity for people to operate in an environment where the guard is down. When I say the guard, I mean the people who supervise transactions in various government departments and entities. When they are not there to perform that monitoring and supervisory function, some people find an opportunity to do all sorts of wrong things that are not normally acceptable. And it makes it easier as well because the rules of procurement, among other things, as well as the interface of transfers of money is also happening in an environment that is not supervised. Let alone the fact that the emergency provisions get invoked, which means that everything must be procured now so that it can be delivered next week. So all of those things create an opportunity for people to play around the system. But others are also under pressure because they are realizing that coming out of this COVID, there may be a situation of unemployment, either them directly affected or those close to them being directly affected, for example, a spouse and all of that. And then there's also the reality that people can easily rationalize these things when they do them. So a combination of those things, if you look at the pressure, the rationalization, as well as the fact that they are operating in an environment where there's an opportunity, it increases the risk of fraudulent activity. So the risk is higher than what it used to be, even under normal operating conditions when you invoke these kind of provisions. So we said we are not going to force ourselves into going to those environments physically. But what is important with an auditor's job, among other things, is that when an auditor pronounces on things like preventative controls, then it triggers in the mind of the person sitting in a particular entity, if they are listening. It triggers the fact that the auditors are here even if I'm not seeing them, kind of stuff, you know. Because by you coming forth with preventative controls that now need to be prioritized in the operating environment, you are, as an auditor, effectively announcing your presence, but you are not there physically. Your presence as an auditor is there. Think about it. When your presence is there, but someone does not see you physically, you know, then it becomes a very tricky for them to take chances because they know that
Absolutely.
This presence of yours that they are not able to see physically must be somewhat of a deterrent. It must deter you from thinking that you are now going to take advantage of this opportunity because you're not seeing them physically. So the big lesson here is that no one must see the auditors physically. The best way to deter fraudulent activity is to announce your presence.
Oh, yes.
As well as to demonstrate that you do have the tools that we are going to use in order to get to the bottom of the processing environment where transactions are happening. Nobody needs to know how those tools look like, nor do they need to know what procedures you are going to perform. So in a way, when you say then you are going to protect the public purse, you do not want to get into an investigation afterwards. All we are interested in is let us discourage those that might want to take the chance. Let's discourage them so that there can be a fewer number of them, because it's tiring to chase after people who have taken money, because they always get much brighter and clever in hiding it after they've taken it. So the best way for us is to position ourselves such that they find it hard to continue to rationalize that wrong behavior, because they now know that the auditors are here, even if they are not seeing them. Now, how do we get to be here without being seen? Part of what we've done was to then invoke information technology audit techniques, computer-assisted audit techniques, which in many ways are a very useful tool to make sure that when you process a transaction in a particular department or in a particular agency, you know that by the auditors invoking that methodology as well as the data analytics, you must know that the auditors are going to have access to the entire database. Unlike under other conditions, when they perform a statutory audit, you think somewhat they are going to select 20 items from a population of 5,000. But in this instance, if they are going to use information technology audit techniques, they are going to be able to mine from the first beneficiary to the last beneficiary, provided they are deploying the relevant tests to the data. Let me give an example of this.
Please.
In our case, for example, we've got a benefit that is made available to people that are in need, that are not employed, that do not benefit from other benefits of government. And this figure has been set at 350 rands per person per month for 6 months. Part of what a preventative audit strategy driven by information technology tools, for example, is that you can write a code that goes into that database and say to the database, please select anyone and everyone in this database who is due to receive 351 rand and above. Which means that anyone who thought they are going to use the opportunity for the weak internal controls to set up a payment for 350,000, that information technology intervention is going to pick it up.
Absolutely.
And someone is going to have to answer to the fact, why is so-and-so receiving 350,000 when the upper limit for everybody is 350? So can you see now, this is not driven by a sample. It's driven by the ability to go into the entire database and be able to identify those anomalies that you would not want to find in the database, because there's no such thing as you can organize 100,000 people and have them getting paid into your own bank account. It doesn't work like that. So everybody must get 350, and if there's someone who gets 351 rands and above, then there's something that the officials of that particular department would have to answer to. So that is what I mean when I say the auditors are here, even if you don't see them, because they've got tools that are going to go into your database 100% and check for things that might point to possible abuse of that public money that was made available to relieve social and economic stress among the beneficiaries identified by government. So that's where we play the role. So our role is not necessarily to go and look for that fraudulent activity in isolation. We are also looking at, is this program and this money being handled in the most efficient manner, so that anybody who claims that they were entitled to this, we can show that all of it has possibly been spent. But in addition to that, we also go in and say, you had this particular processing happening in the month of May. We want to see now what is the additional activity and transactions that come in the month of June. Can we check whether the month of June's transactions compare reasonably to the previous period? Have you reconciled your books to the underlying records? Is what has been paid in the bank represented by full reconciliation of your records internally? And these are the steps that we are going to be embarking on a number of those package benefits, which means that we have positioned ourselves to deal with them proactively rather than having to worry about them 18 months and longer after all these benefits had been paid. And I think that's probably where the strategic advantage for us is.
Excellent. Look, AG, your visibility during this COVID pandemic in South Africa has been unparalleled. I've seen you on TV, I've heard you on radio and so forth, and you have been leading. And one of the things that I've noticed, you always talk of controls. AG, is this your way of endorsing that a control reliance strategy should be what we should be thinking about as auditors? I know very well that in the past, auditors have been a little bit, they've got a lot of misgivings with the control reliance strategy, as they feel the controls, especially within an African environment, are not so robust enough for us to follow an effective and efficient control reliance strategy when we're auditing. Are you endorsing it, Sam? Are you saying, yes, let's go for it?
Well, I mean, there are two aspects to it. There's a part to the control reliance strategy that is about the auditor taking reliance from the controls that have been deployed by management. So that's the one aspect to it. It's further down the line, that one. It has not yet grown to get to that level. Okay. But to build and to gear up to that level, as an auditor, in the realm of controls, you've got to identify what category of controls is of strategic value. And in our case in South Africa, we have identified the preventative control as one component of controls that has got strategic advantage. What does it mean? It means that the people who are entrusted with public money must make it their business to develop preventative controls. Yes. How do I prevent people that want to divert the public funds from succeeding? That's what a preventative strategy is about. And we are pushing that down the system with accounting officers to say, it's no good taking on a responsibility as an accounting officer together with your chief financial officer and all the people in your environment, but they don't put in preventative controls, because then it might as well not exist, because you are not assisting the public to make sure that the money that has been taken out of their taxes, placed at your disposal, is sufficiently protected. So that's what I think we are emphasizing more and more. And we are emphasizing this more and more because at the tail end of that control strategy is the fact that in the South African context, we now have powers to issue certificates of debt that might attach to somebody's pocket. So the question that we are going to ask all the time when some fraudulent activity has happened will be, what did you do from a preventative point of view? Yes. Yes. And I think the philosophy and the logic of it, you can also see when you listen to the narrative of our leaders around COVID-19. Mm-hmm. The best way to avoid having to be falling foul of the virus is to take a very strong preventative approach. And we think that even in terms of our auditing environment, if people do not prevent someone making a payment to a third party without due cause, then they are compromising the financial system and the public funds. If somebody in the information technology environment who is the information technology head does not prevent inappropriate access by people who've got a conflict of interest in their functions, they are opening up the system to all sorts of access that will result in transactions being effected. And if the reconciliations of the records are not being done at regular intervals, it might never arise that there was an inappropriate fraudulent transaction that was carried out. So this control strategy is not that one that is about reliance, but if it is built with sufficient robustness over time, it might lead to a point where the auditor is now able to take reliance from the controls that have been implemented by management. So it's effectively something you are not going to impose on management, but you are going to build up over a period of time, because if you can show that you have passed the scrutiny of the audit on the back of preventative controls, then it means that you are in control of the finances. You have been properly positioned with the right skills to do those preventative measures, which sometimes are not easy. Because if you are going to insist on prevention controls as an accounting officer of a department, there's going to be many instances where you have to say no to your seniors. So your seniors could come to you and say, hey, I've got this invoice that I received from so-and-so, who's our supplier. He's complaining that we have not been paying them. If you are going to be the kind of accounting officer that takes that invoice and give it on to the creditors department and say, please pay this, without empowering them to check the necessary preventative controls, things like, are we paying for something that's been delivered? Is it in accordance with the contract? Are we happy with the delivery that we have received? Do we have sufficient cash resources to pay it? Is it due? Those questions are preventative control type questions. And so the point being that in the hierarchy of controls, there are those that are going to be reactive in nature, where you now have to run after somebody after the money has left the bank. But there's a suite of them that are preventative in nature, where you can stop this particular payment from being made, even if it causes delays elsewhere. Because then the cost benefit is, does the institution benefit from this control versus having to chase after it? Because there are many instances where people want to be paid before they've delivered. And when they get paid before they delivered, some of them never come back with that stuff that we were trying to buy. And that's the value in our case of elevating the strategic importance of preventative controls.
Excellent. Auditor General, it's always exceptional whenever I have a meetup with you and we discuss matters audit. I do appreciate the time that you've given us as AFROSAI-E and myself. But before I go, I want to leave time for my CEO. She might have one or two questions, but I'm a very happy man today. I think we're going to have a wonderful paper coming up with the insights that you've given us. And the world is better. The world is better when we listen to our leaders. I thank you, AG.
Thanks very much, Edmund.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ed. AG, I just have one follow-up question, and the last question in terms of what we have sent you. And in terms of that last question, you have led for about 14 years now in the office of the AG, as DAG and as AG. You've influenced internationally, continentally, and locally as well. And you've also been a big influence for AFROSAI-E in terms of how we operate. You've been part of the decisions that have been made within the CBC, IDI, INTOSAI. One of the biggest steps that you have taken is what you are talking about, the change in the legislation that has just taken place now. And for me personally, you've been a great leader. You've been an example of effective leadership, compassionate leader. That's what you have demonstrated over the years that I have known you. That's how I have known you. Let me speak for myself, rather. And AG, I think you have a wealth of experience and knowledge. And this is like an open-ended question. Is there anything else that you would like to add to the region, to the AGs in the region, either around this audit of COVID-19 or generally in terms of what you'd like to, this is not your goodbye message, but this is just in relation of what we have been talking about.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for those sentiments, Macy. You know, if you look at the AFROSAI region, and in particular our sub-region, AFROSAI-E, it's one region where you've got very active Auditors General. You would have seen recently in the subcommittee meetings when we could not travel to Accra because of COVID-19. Many of them came to the party. Many of them joined up to engage on those sub-elements of what make us strong as a region. And I think that we must build on that. I think the AGs have got a very clear idea of where they want to take the institutions of Auditors General in the continent. And I think that we have enough of experience and capacity for our leaders in the region to drive the key programs that we are preoccupied with. And I'm sure that with that we can extend it to also influence other institutions and work with the likes of the African peer review mechanism in elevating issues of governance in the region. So I think there's a good set of influences that we are going to have, as well as that we are going to be asked to come forward and do. Because remember, the point about us as auditors is not necessarily to point out those things that are not working, but it's also to find ways to give input to systems of good governance that are so important in the drive for changing the experience of life for all citizens in our continent. And I think that if we can begin to make sure that we consolidate the initial efforts that have been put by our leaders in driving change in their institutions, I think it'll be better for the continent. But as you know, we struggle with some of the things that are assumed in other jurisdictions. Things like getting to be outside of the executive arm of government, where we now have to seek permission from those that we must provide independent oversight over when it comes to resources. Those are still going to preoccupy our minds. It's a matter that doesn't go away quickly because some of them are rooted in the culture as well as the institutional architecture of our respective SAIs. But also it's in response to the laws that have been put in place. But I think we shouldn't tire and walk away from trying to drive those matters because they continue to be relevant for making sure that when we want to spring up to proactive mode in an environment like COVID-19, we do not need to seek somebody's permission for it. We can do it because we know we've got the flexibility of the resources, we've got the flexibility, and we are allowed to think independently of those that control the purse strings in order to do this. Because remember, part of what is also not so visible is that there are many relationships and interfaces between commercial entities and individuals that operate as people in leadership positions in government. And you need to have the freedom to know how to navigate those environments without relying on the people who might feel a bit jittery about your ability to dig deep into some of the closets that they may not have wanted you to go into. And I think the emphasis on independence as well as the ability to access the necessary resources to do the work continues, I think, to be a key issue in respect of the work we do in the continent. The rest of it, I guess, in the broader sense, I mean, in CBC, as you have mentioned, we have already covered huge ground since we took on the role as chair in 2013 in Beijing, INTOSAI, where we've now gotten to a point after 6 years where we are navigating the space to institutionalize some of the professionalization tools that we have been working with many other Supreme Audit institutions on. And I think it will come in handy to know now how do you properly position a human resource environment of a SAI, and what are the type of capacity development pathways that we can traverse in order to get our people to that level, so that they can see themselves not only as employees of SAIs, but as professionals in the public sector space in their own right. It is a major effort to get it to implementation, but I guess those that agreed to put in place the Lima Declaration in 1977 never knew that just about 40 years later, we will be dealing with other matters that are pertinent to the decisions that they took then. So I guess every one of us in the different roles, in the different generations that come into the different SAIs are going to have certain key milestones that we are going to try and leave in order for others to build onto. So the journey continues, and I think that we are well placed with you guys as the Secretariat to make sure that we continue to lubricate the system, to lubricate the environment in which our SAIs operate, so that they continue to be the people looked up to, whether it is for dealing with issues of natural resources, whether it is to do with the issue of the management of public finances across the continent. Yep. Thank you.
And I think from our side, we take the issue, thanks AG, we take the issue of independence for granted. And I've spoken to some of the leaders that are already tired and they want to give up. And I appreciate the message that, you know, they should not tire and they should be proactive and fight on. Just a last small one, just for my purpose, AG, in terms of reporting the findings for the current COVID-19 audit, are you comfortable and confident that government will respond in implementing the controls that you would have identified as lacking, and that they will respond immediately? Because as you say, you don't want to go back and have to deal with the investigations after, and I think that was the President's expectation as well. So are you comfortable that they will be in a position to respond to the findings that you raised at the time?
You know, as the findings come, we are going to remind the people that we are auditing about a very important statement that was made by the President when he reached out on this. And he said he does not want to have to respond to a call for a commission of inquiry on COVID.
Yes. Yes.
That to us puts the stick on the ground. So we'll say to someone, look, if you do not want to respond to these controls, then you are going to create an environment where the President now in future has to respond to calls for a commission of inquiry. So it is you, the person responsible for these funds, to put right that which has been found to be wrong in terms of how these monies have been handled. Hence, we're not just going to do one audit at the end of 6 months. As these transactions and these benefits are being processed under the umbrella of COVID-19, we are going to be auditing in those months and putting out recommendations of the previous month, the following month, with a view to giving you a chance to correct whatever we picked up the previous month. So if you've corrected it, then we know that like other human beings, you are not infallible. So by agreeing to correct something that had gone wrong, which could have resulted in a significant financial loss, you are playing the game. So if all those things that have been picked up as contributing to a possible financial loss, that might result in someone making a call for a commission of inquiry, you will be helping everybody else. So I guess we've got sufficient ammunition to insist that if you don't, then we will tell then the president that if this person continues to ignore these recommendations and this counsel, this person might be opening up that avenue for others to call on you to set up a commission further down the line. So that then we will then be putting the cat among the pigeons here, and then there will be a nice conversation to be had between that individual then and the president, should they insist that they are going to do nothing about good counsel.
Excellent. Brilliant.
Thank you very much, AG. We appreciate your time and thanks for your insights.